What's up, everyone? Well, today I am going to decandle this large Japanese black pine that was field grown and that I've been working on for 3, 4, or 5 years, something like that. There's a couple previous videos that I did on this, and one was just last fall. I did a hard cutback on it, and this spring's growth looks absolutely fantastic. I was a little bit concerned about the health, but it looks really good. Not only has it sent out really strong growth from each branch tip, it's actually now sending out secondary branch growth from each of those growth sections. So as a decandling operation, I would expect that this is going to go fantastically, and then I'm going to get a lot of really good buds behind the decandling sites. On bigger trees, it's often the case that you might just decandle, do a normal decandling at the node points to make things more reliable. But with the vigor of this, I think I'm going to take the opportunity to go ahead and decandle back into the needles on some of the branches, which means I might also be removing some of the wire that I put on last fall. And the purpose of that is just to really push more budding and keep it really contained. So we recently launched our Shohin Japanese Black Pine Masterclass on Bonsaify.com, which you can check out. It's aimed squarely at smaller pines than this one, and but it takes a tree from very early in the process, even germinating seeds, all the way through developing a more refined but Shohin sized tree. So I'm actually using some of the techniques that I go through in detail in that course on this tree. There's two ways that black pines will bud out, either at the node point, which is a regular decandling, or in between pairs of needles, which if you cut behind the node point is what ends up having to happen. When I was a student learning bonsai, mostly from Boone, most of the black pine work that I've done came from him in terms of techniques and whatnot. He always wanted us to decandle at the nodes, and what I found was with big trees it works out relatively well, but with small trees, even the summer growth length in addition to the existing branching can end up being too long. And so decandling behind the node into the needles from the previous year, and even cutting off almost all of the needles from the previous year, can be really beneficial in terms of creating very compact structures. Now, this tree wasn't even decandled last year, which is one of the reasons why all of these branches are elongating really vigorously this year. But that doesn't matter, because I can actually decandle not just this year's growth and not just the node, but because I've left enough needles, I could go back and basically do a decandling of 2 years worth of growth all right now. I'm kind of dividing the tree in two and decandling the strong stuff behind the node, but anywhere where I have more interior buds, maybe stuff that just has a small candle on it, I can decandle those at the node to give them about a 2-week head start. So when the needles that come out at the node point end up being quite a bit faster than the needles that come out or needles that come out from in between the pairs of needles. And so there's about a 2-week difference in my experience, or I guess maybe in my climate. And so it is an interesting way of balancing out the two. So back in here, I have like a very small bud that only has a little bit of an extension on it. If I leave it and don't decandle, it'll get super strong, but I'll decandle it at the node so that that bud gets a little bit of a head start over some of the stronger growth that is running towards the outside. So I didn't even wire this all the way out here because I knew that I wanted to cut most of it off. So this is this spring's growth, and this is last summer's growth. So I'm going to cut back into last summer's growth, leaving, maybe 7 or 8 pairs of needles there. Roughly the same thing here as well. Here's the node. That's some of last year's needles, and this is the needles from this spring. One of the things that I discuss in the eCourse actually is this problem. So if you can imagine, there's no needles in this area, so there's no possibility of budding. So if I had to keep this branch for some reason, I would only be able to, sort of like a node on a maple, I would only be able to get a budding up here or down here. So I'm going to decandle it, but I'm also going to decandle it behind the node. But I can't go back too far because the area behind it is actually devoid of needles. So in Shohin Japanese black pine, this becomes a critical part, and it's basically genetic to each pine. You can collapse that space, but only to a certain extent. So if you can find black pine stock that has good short necks on the candles, it gives you an easier time, I guess, in making Shohin. All right, and now looking at the front of the crown, it's kind of the same situation. I've got this year's growth, last year's growth, and then I've got 3-year-old needles on here. So I'm going to actually take off 2 entire years worth of growth here, leaving just the 3-year needles on a bunch of these branches because they're too long. So up here at the top, I wired these branches down, but I definitely want to get things tightened up here a little bit. The movement that I used last fall to get these branches into place it's really going to save me a lot of time, but I still have to create more ramification. So I am going to be cutting the majority of this quite close. And these weaker buds that are here, I'm just going to decandle at the node, giving them a little bit of a head start. So I'm really tempted to leave this to start a new sacrifice branch and help heal over the wound that's right here. But I think I'm going to cut it off this year and then start building a sacrifice branch at some point in the future. That way I can kind of hide it in the midst of a bunch of other branching. I'm going to give this a little bit of a spin again. As you can see, I've removed probably 75–80% of the foliage, something like that, and that's going to convince the tree that it's going to need to send out lots of buds. There are definitely times where I do not decandle some of my pines, and that's because they're not vigorous enough. But this one, having just had a large sacrifice branch cut off last fall, is quite vigorous, and all of the energy that it had stored up, obviously the roots are healthy and everything is chugging along really well, so it's not going to skip a beat. I do want to say thank you to everyone who's already purchased the Bonsaify Mastering Shohin Black Pine eCourse. If you haven't and you want to check it out, there's a free preview available. Just head on over to bonsaify.com. We'll put a link in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.